spectacular.
Spectacular waste of money. Damn thing's always breaking down.
You need a lift?
In another adaptation of one of the original science fiction classics, a man makes a time machine. But does the time machine end up making the man? No, that's silly. But this fella does make a machine that can travel into the far future. It's the ultimate fast forward button for skipping past the commercials. The time machine.
Nothing will ever change what happened.
You're wrong, because I will change it.
The Time Machine is a 2002 adaptation of H.G. Wells' book, The Time Machine, while also partly being a remake of George Pal's 1960 film, The Time Machine, which itself was a relatively faithful adaptation of Wells' original story. There had been other lesser-known versions of the story made for television, but that 1960 film was a reasonable success, and it had legs, where, over many decades of TV screenings and the like, came to be considered a movie classic.
What are you doing here?
Time travel has always held a fascination for storytellers, whether it be books, movies, or whatever. It's often been used to look at things as they are, and then contrast them with an extrapolated fantasy. It was about a man driven by curiosity, then survival, and then spurred into action after seeing how things turned out. Curiosity, survival, and action. Maybe I should make a cake for that party. Can I make a cake that people will like in time for the party? Do I have time to whip out to Costco to get a proper cake?
Well, actually, I'm from here. Just not from now.
Time travel is always about going forward or back. Going back to fix something or going forward to escape something. Go back to break something, go forward to see whether or not your cake gave everyone food poisoning.
You sound just like my father.
The Time Machine is one of the earliest time travel stories, but one where technology made it possible, and also where technological advancements are under the microscope.
I wonder if we'll ever go too far. With all of this.
Wouldn't it be fun to go back and see the invention of the ukulele, then go back a day earlier and prevent the invention of the ukulele?
Tell me about the time machine.
Time Machine was written by H.G. Wells in 1894. It was later adapted to a motion picture by George Pal and a stage musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber, which ran on
that's
Broadway
not
for
what I
23
mean.
years.
Alexander Hartigan is an absent-minded teacher, scientist, and inventor in New York City at the end of the 19th century. He proposes to his girlfriend, Emma, but then she's killed in a mugging gone wrong. A few years later, Hartigan, having become obsessed by his work, has built a time machine in his workshop. He travels back to the fateful night so he can stop Emma's death, but instead she's run over by a horse spooked by a motorcar. Well, that was awkward. Realizing that he can either try again, but maybe have to see Emma's death over and over again, he decides to travel to the future to see if anyone knows why he cannot change the past. A sojourn to the New York Public Library in 2030 has Hartigan interacting with a bored AI assistant, Vox 114, who side-eyes the idea of traveling into the past.
Tell me about him.
Alexander Hartigan, 1869 to 1903. American scientist given to eccentric postulation.
A few years down the track, Hartigan is almost caught up in a man-made disaster where the moon breaks up, though he will be safe inside his time machine as it heads 800,000 years into the future. It's at this point that you try to add up all the late fees for hanging onto the VHS of the Blues Brothers for all that time, which possibly could have single-handedly saved Blockbuster from oblivion. It seems that a construction incident on the moon has basically blown the moon apart with disastrous consequences for the entire planet, not least of which is the realization that even when there's a full moon, there will be no full moon. When the machine finally stops in the far future, Alexander is found and nursed back to health by Mara, a member of the tribe known as the Eloi.
You see, I built a machine that allows me to travel through time. I'm from the past.
Oh.
Mara shows Alexander the remnants of the world he knew. You know, there are pros and cons to being 800,000 years in the future. I mean, the ferry is a much more pleasant experience in New York, getting a cab is still a pain, but at the same time, traffic is less of a problem and finding a parking spot is just that much easier.
Why do you learn this language if you don't use it?
It's a tradition we hand down.
The Eloi have an almost idyllic existence in their village, but they're wary of what happens at night, but not very chatty about what exactly is going on.
I told them you hit your head and you are a wandering idiot.
There's also no one older here, and of course none of the Eloi are able to offer much of an explanation. It turns out that the Eloi are being grabbed by the Morlocks, which is actually more painful than it sounds. The Morlocks are powerful and animalistic. They live below ground, and it's looking like they've chosen an Eloi-rich diet. An attack by the Morlocks on the Eloy village ends with Mara being taken below, where she's going to be used for breeding stock.
We can save her.
Mara's younger brother, Kalen, shows Alexander a remnant of the past, the snooty AI from the library, who's still functioning 800,000 years later. Now, anything working after 800,000 years without a service call is a minor miracle, and also handy since the call-out fee for an on-site repair would be horrendous.
Then you can help us find the Morlocks. Find Mara.
He finds her in a cage, but he also finds the Uber Morlock, who is leader of a more cerebral group of Morlocks who has control over the less evolved grunt Morlocks. Uber Morlock seems rather chatty compared to the others. He also has highly evolved psychic abilities, where he can look into Alexander's memories. Why? No idea.
You have your answer.
A confrontation on the time machine sees Uber Morlock killed when he's stuck in the time field surrounding the machine. But in the even farther future, the Morlocks have made Earth an absolute wasteland without their main brain man to keep them in check. Zapping back to Mara, Alexander sabotages his machine so it will explode, which we assume takes out all of the Morlocks underground. With his machine destroyed, Alexander will now hopefully find what he was looking for in the future with Mara and the other Eloy, who apparently haven't learned the secret of how to make mesh tank tops.
Must be here for a reason.
Here's a film I saw in theatres in 2002 and had not felt the need to return to it until now. My feeling at the time was that it was pretty much fine apart from the Uber Morlock, which did seem relatively unnecessary to the story. However, watching it again, I still think the Uber Morlock is there to hide the fact that there's not really much of an ending without him. Jeremy Irons at least makes the character somewhat watchable. A Morlock that's less a physical threat than the others we've seen, but nevertheless kinda menacing just down to that voice. A voice that sounds like a box cutter ruining the first 5 custom t-shirts in the package.
My cast concentrated on expanding our cerebral abilities.
The story was originally set in England, but this version is now set in New York, though almost all of the major roles are played by non-Americans. Australian actor Guy Pearce stars as Alexander. We'll forget Neighbours, but he got good reviews in Priscilla Queen of the Desert, LA Confidential and Memento, and for a time found himself making big-budget movies like The Time Machine.
I guess I could.
Irish pop star Samantha Mumba was still a teenager when she played Mara. Mark Addy from The Full Monty, The Flintstones and later Game of Thrones was Alexander's friend Philby. Sienna Guillory appeared as the doomed Emma. I mean, that's not her character's full name. Her full name, totally doomed Emma. Mara's brother Kalen was played by Samantha Mumba's own brother. Phila Delore channels any disdain for this movie into her character, Alexander's housekeeper, Mrs. Watchit.
Time travel?
Yes.
Accessing science fiction.
No, practical application.
Orlando Jones appears as Vox, and Mike Knight's boss, Yancey Arias, is one of the few speaking Eloy.
It'll help people keep their teeth well into their 40s.
The film was shot in the US, at Warner Brothers Burbank Studios, and at locations around New York State.
What is he saying?
They're trying to decide if we should throw you in the river.
The film has a very slick look with simple but effective production design. The updated version of the Time Machine is now huge, looking like what happens if a solid gold golf cart made it with a pipe organ of low virtue.
Why would you say something like that?
Director Simon Wells came from the world of animation, where he'd found success directing films such as An American Tail, Fievel Goes West, and Prince of Egypt, where it does seem like he had one major qualification to direct this movie. H.G. Wells was his great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was a sailor on a boat, but I cannot tie a knot, though at least here, Wells' direction is fine. The film's never annoying in that area. Gore Verbinski stepped in to direct some scenes when Wells was unable to, but in general, this is Wells' film. Despite it being a new adaptation of the book, the film also credits the screenwriter of the 1960 film, David Duncan, while the new film's script was written by John Logan, who'd been a writer on Gladiator and at around the same time had written Star Trek Nemesis. But don't write in just yet. He'd also write The Last Samurai, Aviator and Skyfall. Okay, now you can write in.
That's a first.
The film's script gives the main character Alexander a bit more depth and motivation other than just curiosity. Hardigan is driven by trying to sidestep grief by preventing Emma's death, though he seems to have found some sort of peace within himself by staying in the far future, where Blockbuster can just kiss his ass over seeing those late fees for the Blues Brothers. The Eloy are not bone idle layabouts in this version, just folks who tried to get by without the Morlocks treating them like a meal ready to eat.
Nice.
Earth isn't destroyed by war, but by the moon blowing up, though it was not due to an explosion at Nuclear Waste Area 2, but a subterranean nuclear explosion going horribly pear-shaped. One major change that works well enough is expanding on the futuristic recording devices that the time traveler finds in the future, where in the 1960 movie it's a bunch of spinning rings, and here it's an AI librarian who lives for 800,000 years, but is still waiting for George R.R. Martin to start work on A Dream of Spring.
What, you've been living under a rock?
Yes, I've been living under a rock.
The film was bumped from its original 2001 release date to put some distance between its release and that of the first Lord of the Rings movie, also because there were sensitivities about showing New York smashed to pieces at the time. When it was released in 2002, it did okay, but not okay enough for a relatively costly movie, and one that also did not review all that well. So it's an enjoyable enough film at the beginning that falls foul of the perceived need for it to become an action film at the end. The Morlocks are more powerful animalistic creatures. I like their design well enough, though the scenes of them collecting people reminds me a bit more of Planet of the Apes than The Time Machine. But if you can't steal from the best, then screw it and just steal from them anyway.
Your futile effort to have a question answered. Do you think I don't know you, Alexander?
As it's a science fiction film from 2002, of course it uses computer graphics for special effects, but uniquely for the era, it's mostly used tastefully and with a level of restraint. Something that's neither tasteful nor restrained, Auntie Beryl's glamping Instagram posts from Glastonbury.
There are things better left not said.
So the library AI was a nice touch. The more verbose Uber Morlock makes a sort of sense in order to give some context to a story that had previously been told purely from the perspective of the traveller. The Uber Morlock is not entirely successful in trying to expand the film beyond that. Visually though, it's just a very attractive film to look at in terms of production design, costume, its cast, its music. It's not offensively bland, but it is very bland. This was considered a pretty ordinary film at the time of its release with the critics of the day, though I suspect those viewers who saw this film when they were quite young will have enjoyed it much more. The most you can say about it is that it tells the story relatively efficiently in under 100 minutes with a solid cast, and it's mostly well made. It just gets bogged down in the final reel with a big villain and generic action scenes. Jeremy Irons does what he does best to try and spice things up, but if you think he's here just for the paycheck, well, that's probably true.
We all pay a price.
I enjoy The Time Machine, but it's a film where it does seem to pull its punches and at times just feels bland. Enjoyable, but not something that will stick with you. Have you watched a movie at night and thought, it's a pleasant enough diversion, but then the next morning you can't for the life of you remember what it was you watched the previous evening? Well, that's The Time Machine. Easy enough to watch, even easier to forget. But of course we can't discount the lingering effects of concussion.
Will there be anything else?
No.
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
Live long and prosper.